So, beginnings are very important, and I will begin at the beginning. I am a storyteller. It's my job. I tell stories. I am a professional bard. I haven't quite got to the magic bit yet, and I'm not too good in a fight, but I try. And what I'm going to bring you this afternoon is performance storytelling for role-playing games. I'm also a gamer. I've been gaming since the 80s. I remember back in 1985 when I played my first game of basic D&D, back when basic D&D existed. That's when my storytelling started. That's when I began to learn how to create stories and how to put them into people's minds. And over the years, over the decades, it has become apparent to me that while I love the stats, I love the dice always help. That element of chance and being able to froth and flick through and fondle the books and choose what you're going to do next. The reason that I play games and the reason that I run games is to bring people into the story. So sat in your chairs or sat on the other end of a computer, you are in the story, you are present, and you remember it. It's the thing down the pub afterwards. We tell the stories about the games we played. And I remember years and years of people saying to me, did this really happen? And you sort of said yes, but in our heads. So my session now, we'll have some time for questions at the end. I'm going to talk about games and I'm going to talk about stories, but I'm going to tell you some stories as well. Because by telling you the stories, you can see what I mean about storytelling. So all you have to do is sit back, relax, and let the pictures appear in your mind. Because in the beginning there was nothing. A great and vast emptiness. But at one end of this nothing there was a world. A world of ice and snow and mist, and that was named Niflheim. And at the other end of this great and empty gap was a land of fire and flame and ashes, and that was Muspel, Muspelheim. Great lands of ice and fire and Ginnungagap, the vast and empty space in the middle. In Niflheim, great glaciers creaked and moaned and moved and began to stretch and pour over the edge of Niflheim into the gap. And as they met the warm air that came from Muspelheim, those glaciers began to melt. And from that meltwater came life. And the first life was a giant. Bigger than me. Bigger than this room. Bigger than houses, bigger than worlds. Ymir, the great cosmic world giant. Neither male nor female, but both. And Ymir slept. And as Ymir slept, from the sweat from under its armpit, other creation stories are available, but from the sweat beneath its left armpit, two giants were born, a male giant and a female giant, and they did the things that male and female giants do together, and they made more giants, and they made more giants, and they made more giants, until three brothers came along. One was called Ve, one was called Vili, and the other was called Odin. That's the beginning of the world. That's the beginning of everything, according to the Norse mythology. And when you play your games, be cinematic. In your minds, I'm sure you could see that vastness of the cosmos. When you're starting with your players and you're writing your games, you can start at that great cosmic size and describe that and be that. The fact that I have to mime Ginnungagap, which is the impossible void, I can't do it, but I can put the image into your head. And I can put the image into your head that far in one direction is a land of ice and snow, and in the other direction is a land of fire. And you can see that. You could, of course, bring your beginnings right down. I actually did research before coming here today. I don't just turn up, make it up, and then go to the pub afterwards. But I was asking friends, other GMs, people I know and I respect who gamed over the years, about how they begin their games or how they have begun their games. And there were some great ideas. One I liked was, it starts with a fight. No one knows what's happening, but it starts with a fight, and bang! With every punch to the head, with every failed roll of the dice from the player, bang! A memory appears. And during that fight, those memories begin to fit together as a jigsaw to give the plot, to give the context, to give the world. It was a lot easier back when I started, when a wizard would stagger into a tavern with a dagger in his back and a map in his hand. The treasure! And die. Thanks very much. We've never met before, have we? No, but shall we all trust our lives to each other and journey out? Yes, I'm an assassin. Are you? That's nice. I'm a paladin. We have treasure. The beginnings are important. And they can be as big or as small as you want, but it's about bringing the people into the story so they can see it. You either describe it, as I told you about the great beginning of the cosmos, or you can begin to give people little drip feeds. Another nice example is from Breaking Bad. It starts with Walter White in the desert in his pants. And then there's however many seasons that lead up to explaining that. I still can't quite remember why, but it's a great beginning. It's a great way to start, and it's intriguing, and it leads people into the story so they want to know more. Now, you may create your story. You may finally craft your adventures and see it from the beginning, and all the nice little maps on squares and hexes and isometric bits of paper, and there's the end, and people start at the beginning and they work their way through at the end. Hands up who's ever plotted one of those out. Keep your hand up if it has gone smoothly from beginning to end. Yeah, it can, but it doesn't. Adventures, they seem to be linear because we experience them in linear time. We turn up, we sit down, we crack open a beer or get a coffee and get the sandwiches and the pencils and the dice, and we start a session, and at the end of that session, time has passed and there are things that we have imagined and remembered. But actually anybody who's GM'd knows that the players turn up and you say, and there are two doors. One is fabulous and huge. It is surmounted by a great saber-toothed skull and glows and hums with magic. And there's another one next to it just for, just for artistic value. But it's not interesting. Which one are you going to go through? You have to create the continuity. When I used to play Cyberpunk, this is back in the 90s now, so first early rules. As a player, I used to watch my friend who was GMing the games weep as he created these wonderful and complex NPCs who were going to come out, the baddie who had gone cyber-psychotic, who was incredibly strong and was going to beat up the whole party, and it was going to be amazing. And I ran in there with my chrome legs jumping and kicking and flinging around. Meanwhile, in every round, there was a guy who just went, aim, 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 headshot. And that was the end of that NPC. Very quickly, our friend realised that there's not much point just having the big, classic cinematic battle. Not the one big baddie. It doesn't work. In this case, it wasn't working. He knew what would happen. So you have to work around that. You can't go, no, he's bigger and stronger than that. We all know the guy's got this massive sniper rifle and it's going to blow his head off regardless of what it's made of. But the story has to be continuous. You can't say no, you can't stop them. You don't want to. You have to let go of your ego and remember that it is the player's game And the pleasure that you should be getting is from creating that experience and then enjoying how they interact with it. And when they gnaws it up for you, think of new things. Again, cyberpunk, netrunners. If you don't know what a netrunner is, back in the old school, they would sit down and they would, with a jack plug, jack in, jack into the cyber deck, and they would be in the full experiential 360-degree virtual reality world as they zipped through cyberspace and had almost magical encounters with data constructs that appeared as magical beings. That was the point where everybody except the netrunner stood up and went and got chips, because that's 45 minutes of one person's incredible adventure through magic. Well, the other players can't know what's going on. But you've still got to create that wonder. And if you create that story and make it interesting, the others will watch just because it's cool to see what's going on, to hear what's happening. Other things people have done to me in my games when I haven't wanted them to. My son, I have a son now who is 18. When he was 6, I started him on D&D and taught him how character creation was the same as algebra. Character points, let's call that P, equals, whatever you roll, R, plus, and the other stats, that's algebra, my son. These are the unknown quantities. At the age of 17, he was playing with a bunch of teens. I was running a game online for people spread out across the country. It was huge and fabulous, and it had been a Lovecraftian experience where they had crept through tunnels in the dark amongst the frozen mummies of lizard men that were entombed in glass boxes on the wall, and when eventually they emerged into the inside of an extinct volcano where the sand from the desert had blown up and over and settled so that only the tops of the city could be seen. And there was the great ziggurat, the top there, and inside, that's where they had to go. That's where they had to get the other dragon orb. They went in. They found the dragon priest mummy. They faced him. They realized that this was going to be tough, and the dragon priest mummy said, I will give you a choice. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Meanwhile, my son, playing a wizard, mage hands the dragon orb out of the statue. Good lad, well done. I wanted you to go a bit mad when you tried to take it out, but very good, very clever. A conversation happens, and then the players start to forget about their characters and start saying, well, we've all had visions about dragons filling the skies, and if we give it to this dude, he's just going to fill the skies with dragons again. And is that a bad thing or is that a good thing? Should we do that? Should we do that? My son, by this point, has decided that he's going to move things on and simply says, I throw the dragon orb to the mummy. The players turn agog. And I, who have this lovely little kind of piece all mapped out about how there will be a wonderful fight and there were going to be baby dragon mummies emerging from the sand, or it was going to be a great reward and gift giving. None of that was planned for. It was almost the end of the game. And so what I simply said was, and the world goes red. That's the end of the game, guys. They couldn't believe what my son had done, but yet what happened next? And then I had to write a completely different adventure afterwards, which was great fun. They went to the elemental plane of fire and it was great. They had great times. But I couldn't break the continuity. And that's what came into my head, that idea about being cinematic. In my head, when I'm running the games and when I'm telling stories, I can see the players, I can see the NPCs. I am the NPCs. You have to be your characters. Do you understand? Good. You can't break the continuity. It's time for another story. There is a land far to the north and far to the east of here, where the summers are short and the winters are long and full of ice, and the forest covers all. Now, at a certain time of year, around this time of year, there is a tradition there where people, on a certain night, will leave a honeyed cake and a glass of strong spirits by the hearth for the dead who are welcome in that house or hall. Not the corpses, not the shambling zombies which are merely the husk and the mortal carriage, but those shades of the dear departed who have yet to move on still linger here because they have some purpose, or they are deeply missed by those who have been left behind. Now, some people say that this tradition is just a way of dealing with grief, of finding solace in memory. But there are others who say that if that cake and that drink is left out, in the morning the hearth has been swept, a new fire has been laid, and the drink and the cake are gone. But no honeyed cakes for those who have not been laid to rest with kindness and tears. No drinks of spirits for those who are lost. Those who are lost in the forest, lost and never discovered. Lost. Like the young woman who, on her wedding night, as she lay in the arms of her husband, and people came to the door and broke it down and slew him where they lay together. She, still in her wedding gown, fled deep into the forest. Deep, deep, lost. Lost and left in pain. The pain of never-ending love and loss for the spirit of that bride. Her wedding gown now taken and torn and used to line the nests of crows. Her bones gnawed by foxes, pierced by tree roots, and clothed in green velvet moss, and studded with red garnet-coloured mushrooms that soften and blacken in the winter amongst the quiet of the pines. Sometime later, another young woman was making her way to the village of her betrothed to be married. She was accompanied by her father and her two brothers. But it was deep in the forest and far from help that they were set upon. Now the men fought well, and they fought bravely to defend their sister, their daughter. And she fled into that forest. She ran deep into that forest, and behind her she could hear the baying of her pursuers as they ran her down like a pack of hounds. Deeper and deeper into the forest she ran, and the trunks of the pines grew taller and taller and closer as hunter and hunted entered the heart of the forest. She tripped. Exhausted, she tripped and fell just for a moment, but just for that moment she landed down in that deep, pungent carpet of pine needles. And as she landed, her hand fell upon a bone. A finger bone. A finger bone that still carried a ring. A woman's ring, a wedding ring. But unnoticing and unknowing and unthinking, as she stood once again, she closed her hand around that bone and around that ring, and this time when she ran, behind her flowed out fog and mist that fanned out like the train of a wedding gown. And the men who ran after her, they didn't notice the fog. They didn't notice the mist as it curled around their ankles. In the heat of the chase, they didn't feel the unseasonable cold as it dragged its nails down their shins. But it was at the foot of a ragged cliff that, exhausted and breathless, she fell down into the mist that opened like waves and rolled over and covered her. Now the men who were chasing her slowed, grinning, knowing that they had caught their prize and hungry for it. But the figure that emerged from the fog, from the mist, was not their quarry. This female form emerged with the fog and mist clinging to it like a silk gown. If in life she had ever been beautiful, now she was terrible to look upon and a host to long brooded vengeance. Sticks, roots and vines and leaves and moss and the things that crawl and chitter amongst the litter of the forest floor combined to make a rough sketch of bones and sinew and muscle. In the quiet, there was a sound, a creaking sound, like a branch in a winter breeze as vines and roots twisted over each other to allow her to open her mouth. And then she screamed. And as she screamed, the horrors of the night poured forth. Fluttering of bats and the chittering of moths and the howling of wolves and black rats poured like sanguine down her front. And those men who didn't themselves run screaming into the darkness and into the forest to meet their own lonely fates were held still to the spot, not just by fear, but by reaching roots that crept out and bound them and tangled them and held them there. And as they cried out for their mothers, as they screamed, and those vines and roots squeezed the breath from their bodies and popped their bones, she, that awful spectre, processed forwards like a bride on her wedding day and kissed each of them in turn. A kiss that was filled with the taste of pine and leaf mould as soft earth poured into their mouths and filled their throats. When the young woman woke, she was being cradled by her father, who had a rough bandage round his head, and he was weeping with happiness at having found her and found her alive. But she couldn't remember how she had left the path and how she had got here. And she couldn't remember where that ring had come from. That ring that she now wore on the finger of her left hand next to her little finger. But once she was happily married, on a certain night of the year, around this time, she would leave a honeyed cake and a glass of strong spirits by the fire. And in the morning, the hearth was as clean as it could ever be, and the fire that was laid there burned longer and hotter than any fire she could have ever laid. And she knew that her babies slept softer and sounder than any of her neighbours, and no man, no wolf, no monster came out of that forest to bother that village for a whole generation. Thank you. That was a story I wrote a while back because somebody needed a story and they wanted a ghost story. They wanted an Eastern European-y, foresty ghost story. It was far too long, so it never got used for its original purpose. So I kept it and told it, and it was subsequently turned into a LARP adventure for some people. I wasn't there. The bastards did it without me. I wasn't there. But in that story, I mean, it's a story. It's not me telling you that, is me telling you it as a story, and it's not designed to be a game. But within that, we start with a nice introduction. We start with context. You know there's a world, it's cold, there's a big forest, and it's cold a lot of the year. You get it, it's up north probably somewhere. Maybe something Eastern European or possibly Scandi, we're not quite sure, but we get it. It's dark and it's scary. But there's a lot of slowness in that story as well. When people are writing action films, they often say that the action should be like a W. You start off with something very exciting, and then you calm down, because you can't keep people going along. It's too tiring, or it loses its impact. It starts off exciting, and then it relaxes. And then it gets exciting again, but you know that it's going to get more exciting later. And then it relaxes. And then you finish with a big fight at the end, and somebody gets hurled out of a skyscraper on Christmas Day. But with those stories, if you try to keep up too much energy constantly, it begins to lose it. It's like in horror genres. Little bits can be scary. When eventually there's a horde of the undead of the people that the players know very well facing them, it just and it becomes like an arcade game. Little pieces of action, little pieces of fear, and then safety. Oh, no, then you're back again. But it's okay. And it feels slightly abusive, but taking your players along through that journey gives the different dynamics, different speeds, and different tensions. Of course, you have to have passion as well. If you're talking about your stories, talking about your games, to avoid going back to the wizard with a knife in his back, yeah, that's what's happened. There's a whacking great relic in about 4 games' time, so do you want to have a fight? Yeah. You've got to believe in the story, because if you believe in it, or at least project that you believe in it, everybody else will. One of the nice things about being a storyteller is, of course, people aren't being distracted when I'm telling stories. People aren't distracted, with dice and pens. They're not interacting. They're passively listening, and you see a mixture of different faces and a mixture of different reactions. Some is this, and hopefully that's not boredom. It's not usually boredom, but it is people slipping into the state. This afternoon it's a bit warm. Everyone's probably had lunch. Sit down. Thank goodness it's not 3 o'clock. You start to see the pictures and you can start to slip into that state. It's more difficult when you're then asking people to interact or make choices or roll dice. So if you're breaking the story there, you need to use those interruptions and those breaks as admitted and recognised breaks, or you use it as part of the story. The room is filling up with water. Okay, so you've got 5 rounds to get out or you're all dead. Yeah, we're out. Well, that was exciting, good. But if stuff keeps filling up, and if people make a roll, oh dear, no, it's still going, it's getting harder, You as the games master, I mean, it could be, they're just not making the rolls, and they just haven't done the thing yet. But you make it feel like things are becoming more desperate. Make it feel like things are becoming more urgent. And that's part of the story. The water is now up to your eyes. Yes, you can swim. Yes, you can take breaths. Yes, you've got to make a swim roll if you want. Yes, yes, good, you dive down. As the games master, you're there to provide that experience for them. Nobody wants to kill players. Killing players is easy. Hello, first level characters. Here's a huge dragon. You're all dead. That's not what any of us do, and we know it. You want to have the risk of death, a real risk of death, so that people aren't thinking, well, it'll be fine, he'll just fudge it, it'll all be good. And I've been lying through games for decades now, and people still think that I could kill them at any moment. But I don't. Often. There is a point in the story sometimes where tragedy hits players. When someone dies, once you've got a group of characters, I use the example to begin with, oh, this is the assassin and the paladin, and let's go off and kill some people we've never met before and steal their holy relics and take them home. Lovely, we're all rich. That's, we all start out like that, and, there are fun games that you can play like that. But if you want to make it a collaborative storytelling experience, if you want to make it an immersive experience where they're in the story, those characters have got to start to know each other. They've got to start to love each other. I mean, they could love each other, but that's a different story. They could love each other, and they will stand up and do things for each other. When someone rescues someone from near death, oh, that's great. When it looks like that character's going to die, the other person comes in and you keep describing how the floor is cracking and falling apart. You can smell the sulfur from the lava underneath, and they cannot get out. I know they're going to get out, but I'm not going to let them know that. And there has to be a risk that they don't. I'm not saying I fudge everything so that everybody lives. Of course not. One of the best games that I ever ran was a game based on the Dragonlance novels. And everybody was terribly holy and hugely overpowered and were fighting gods and enormous dragons, and it had been going on for a while, and it was brilliant. And quite often the players had died and blagged their way out of the afterlife to come back again. But there was one particular character, the paladin in the party. He had a dragon lance, and he was given this dragon lance the last time he died. The last time he died, and said, we will send you back and you will take this. But the only way this is returning to us is when you bring it at your point of death. Brilliant, massive, plus everything, Dragonlance that does loads of stuff, loads of powers, lots of fun. The game by that point had got so high powered it was fireworks, and that was it. There was very little challenge, so it was more about what people were doing and how they were interacting and how they were doing it. But there was a fight at one point. There was a fight with a young white dragon. Shouldn't have been that bad, but oh dear. And I was rolling the dice in front of them so they could see just how bad the damage was, and those dice were coming up high. And the fight carried on, and everybody had lots and lots of hit points, and it was all fine. And then I started rolling behind the screen. And they did it. They killed the dragon, they finished. And everybody, hey, lovely, great, what should we do now? And then I started to speak. As the dragon lies still in the snow, those flakes of snow building up, drifting against its body. The paladin, unfortunately he was called Brother Githwain, but that wasn't, he called him that, so we'll have to go with what his name was. Brother Githwain steps back, and I could see the players going, what? What's happening? Why is he saying what's happening here? Brother Githwain steps back, turns the dragon lance, drives it into the ground, and kneels in front of it and places his hands together. Oh, no, start the players. No, quick, we'll start praying, we'll start getting relics to do things. And all I did was very calmly and very slowly described how his body began to glow and how he then grasped that dragon lance, and the dragon lance disappeared from his hands. And still in his armour, he fell to one side into the cold snow. We had to have a little stop, a little break. People went outside and walked up and down in the garden. It was a real moment. It was something from a game that had been running for a few years and nobody thought was really going to happen. And I didn't fudge it to make it happen, but when it did, it had impact. And I wanted to give both that player, who was sitting there open-mouthed, realising what was going on, that he couldn't do anything, and all the other players who were then, while I was speaking slowly, very slowly, and with pain in my heart about what I was telling them, the other players were going bonkers, desperately trying to help him. So in my stillness they had action, and in the end, that was the end of him. You might not have heard the term to be hag-ridden. Not to be Hagrid. Ooh. To be hag-ridden. There is a scientific term for this. It's called sleep paralysis. It is a condition that affects many people where they wake in the night, unable to move, unable to act. Sometimes their eyes remain closed. Sometimes they may open their eyes, but they lie in their bed in the darkness, unable to interact with the world or stop the feeling that something is kneeling on their chest. Now, some women who experience this, straight women who experience this, sometimes say they see a male figure, an incubus. And there's a very famous picture called The Nightmare. There's a nice oil painting of a young woman in, sort of floaty Victorian gowns in bed, four-poster bed, and there's a horse peeping in, as a nightmare, I think, horse. But on her chest is this strange little impish character. And that's not the sexy incubus, that's the impy incubus. And some men, some straight men, claim that they can see a woman or a female form, and that, as I'm sure many people in this room know, is called a succubus. Sleep should be enjoyable. Sleep should be something that we're all able to easily do. 8 hours a day, they say, roughly, isn't it? Some people need more, some people need to have a nap about 3 o'clock. 8 hours a day is a third of a day. Every year, if you sleep 8 hours a day, every year you have been asleep for 4 months. If you live to the age of 60, because the maths is easier than 70, if you live to the age of 60, you will have been asleep for 20 years. 20 years of tiny slices of death. And so it was that Marcus, well, he should have enjoyed sleep. He should have enjoyed companionship at home, but he couldn't, because so often and so many times during the night he would wake in the darkness, feeling the beads of sweat popping out on his forehead, and feel that presence, as if something or someone was kneeling on his chest. And he could do nothing. He tried to move and he couldn't. Oh, he went to the doctors and he'd asked for various pills to help him sleep, and those would knock him out, and in the morning he would wake mostly refreshed, but eventually those pills began to wear out. He tried meditation, he tried prayer, he tried chakras, he tried things you buy from Holland and Barrett, waft. But none of it worked. Marcus lived on his own because he couldn't share a bed. He'd had relationships in the past, people who shared his bed on a regular basis, but eventually they left, because so many nights he would wake, rigid with fear and unable to move. It got to the point where he decided he needed to do something different. So he decided to stop resisting. So one night he went to bed, he went through the ritual of turning down his duvet and putting on his stripy gym jams that we all wear to bed. He brushed his teeth, got into bed, turned out the light. And at some point, when the night is at its darkest, when the stars are at their coldest, he woke. He woke in his bed, unable to move, in the darkness, staring ahead. And he decided to take control and not to resist. And as he lay there, with his eyes open, and he gave in to the sensation, his eyes truly opened, and there she was. Kneeling on his chest was a succubus. As you all know, succubuses are, let's call them, powerfully attractive. And she was there, kneeling on his chest, looking down into his eyes, hers dark and filled with sparkles like the night sky, and she smiled as she realized that he had truly opened his eyes and could now see her. From that night on, Marcus's sleep was very different. I will leave it up to you to imagine how very different. But in the morning he would wake refreshed. And now he wasn't afraid to go to sleep. And when he woke, he found companionship, he found love, he found passion. This was what he'd been looking for. And there she had been all along. Things changed, though, when she invited him to dinner. They met at her house. It was a wonderful house. It was on a street that he'd been up and down so many times, and yet somehow had never noticed. But there it was, a beautiful big house, and inside the walls were covered with art. The furniture had been beautifully crafted and brought from all corners of the world and all ages. It was Gothic. Not on a cheap resin alchemy metalware naff clock. Gothic. It was truly Gothic and dark and beautiful. Oh, but it was the food. The food was the thing. There was always a lot of meat when he went round. And she would tell him about where the meat had come from, the pork that they were eating, how it had been raised in Italy, in an orchard where the pigs were allowed to roam and to eat the windfall apples as they fell and before the winter wasps came. And when the apples dried up, how the pigs were fed on honey, that final, deep, meaty, smoky flavour to the flesh that it gave. And the wine. Now, she had two types of wine. There were reds and whites and rosés and sparkling wines and fortified wines and dessert wines, delicious things, things that you and I will likely never taste in our life. There were all those different types of wines, and there was other wine. Bottles of red that were racked and stacked, and those were for her customers, she said, for her friends. When he would go around, she would feed him and she would pour glass after glass of wine. And perhaps why don't we flavour it a little bit with some cinnamon and some allspice. And he drank glass after glass of wine. And at the end of the evening they would repair back to his place where they would cuddle for the evening. And in the morning she would have gone and he would wake refreshed. On one particular visit though, after dinner where, the food was so heavily spiced and flavoured, it was almost too much. And where in that red wine was cinnamon, allspice, nutmeg. Have another glass, she said. Have another glass. Let's play a game, she said. All right, he said, go on. Come and sit in this chair. That chair wasn't anywhere near as comfortable as the other chairs in her house. This was just plain wood and felt very strong and solid and heavy. And she said, see if you can get out of this. Have another drink. All right. And she got a leather strap with buckles and tightened it on one wrist and then tightened it on the other, and no, she was right. He couldn't get out, could he? Oh, how they laughed. Have another drink, she said. Some allspice, some cinnamon, some nutmeg in that. Have another drink. He hadn't meant to drink so much that evening. Why don't we try so we can put a band across your chest? Oh, go on then, yeah. We'll play these adult games, go on. And then round his ankles. Have another drink, she said. Shall we go home? Shall we go home soon, he said. In a minute, she said. Have another drink. And eventually, the drink took its toll and his eyes began to droop and drop, and he slept. When the succubus next went to visit one of her friends, her customers, he was a wine collector, and she, as far as he was concerned, she was a wine merchant. Here, she said, I've got something new and very rare. Shall I do it again? It's a shame it's not bubbling, because we could have gone. Here, your non-bubbly red wine. Here, have this, she said. Try this. And he did. He tried, and oh, that's good. It's rich. It's deep. It's Is that allspice I can taste? He said. Cinnamon. Perhaps a touch of nutmeg. It's a very thick, full-bodied, isn't it? Oh, it's very full-bodied, she said. It's wonderful. And so he not only bought the bottle, but bought the whole case. The one and only case that existed in the world, and the one and only case that would ever exist with those particular flavors. Thank you. The Succubus's Wine Cellar, that is called. By the way, if you are interested at the end, do come and have a chat with me. We get kicked out here at the end by going down the end of the corridor, and I have some of my books, including the one that contains that story. Come and chat to me. Endings. Talking of endings. Ooh, quick, endings. Wrap it up nice and tight. Well, two approaches. Either wrap it up nice and tight, give everybody that final satisfaction of, yes, we won, or it's finished and I can see everything spanning out into the existence, and Frodo and Bilbo are getting on the boat and we watch them go off to the distance. That cinematic feeling of everything coming to a close. Or don't. Give them a cliffhanger, but not between. Well, you've sort of done most of it. Well done. I mean, you've screwed up a few bits, but yeah, okay, who wants experience points? Make it feel like that. Let everybody sit back. Let them enjoy that like they've had a good meal. Today, that is all that I have time to tell you. I am, as I've told you already, a professional bard. I am a storyteller, a performance storyteller. My name is Jason Buck, B-U-C-K. It's like other words, but starts with a B. You can find me online. I do shows around the country. I do shows online as well, and various other things. You can find me in the usual places online. But before we finish, I would like to ask, does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask?
You're pretty good at the sound effects.
Thank you.
I'm very impressed. How did you learn to do those? Was there like a course you took, or is it just blind luck and I have no chance of imitating you ever?
Blind luck, practicing a lot, and I have tried to teach people sometimes. I have tried to teach people sound effects sometimes, and they either get it or they don't. So you have to practice, and if you can do it, do it. If you can't, move on or find another one.
when you talk, when you're telling your stories, you give impact, you give pauses, you give all of that. How, in whatever time left we've got, how easy or how do you learn that? Because it's impactful, it makes it pops, it delivers is the word.
Okay.
How do you learn that?
Practice again,
Yeah.
but practice by being mindful about what you're doing. So it is that thing of when I'm watching the audience, it's a thing that when I train other people in storytelling, is silences and stopping are so important. What feels, when you're performing or you're telling a story, you're doing something, what feels like it goes on for hours is often less than a second. It's a thing we're very uncomfortable with human silence. If I stop, it's quite weird. But if I, without picking you out as an individual, if I stop, that has moment. Practice it and let it last until you can't let it last anymore. And watch what people are doing. If they're starting to go, then you notice. So read your audience and let it last and then bring it back. And they will learn to stop and just listen to you. Yes, we are running out of time. Lady in the hat. Person in the hat, sorry.
When you're running a game and you're doing a description, what's your general rule of thumb for how long you give it, how long you lay your description on for before you pause for the players to have an action?
It depends. Sometimes I'll want them to jump in. And sometimes I'll just keep going and occasionally I'll go, is anybody going to do anything? Oh, shit, yes, yeah. So sometimes I'll do that, but sometimes I'll want to do a set piece. And I'll do that, and if I know, because it's either cinematically nice or there are particular things they need to know, then I'll hold that thought, and I'll continue until I'm ready, because I'm the GM and I've got the plan and I can know this. They can screw it up by going, at this point I'll set fire to it, and then I have to improvise. Thank you. One more question, if there is one more question.
So I find when I run games, for example, I end up needing to improvise a lot because when you expect the players to go right, they obviously go left or they go backwards.
Yeah.
How do you pick out the kind of details that you want for these things that they will just have to totally make up on the fly?
Part of it could be tactical. It's a case of they really need to go right and they go left, and in that way you have to find a soft way to make that happen. You open the door, oh, it's a broom cupboard, you know, and you close it down, but kind of, okay, right, go on then, we'll go through the right, whatever. But otherwise, it's with stories or with the game, it's the same thing. It's being present in that story. So as you're telling me that, I'm sort of imagining one of these corridors with a Y-shaped ending, like you get one with a Y-shaped ending, and if we say right, and there's the way, turn right. We're going to look left first of all. I imagine what I see down there. And because I know I've got the context of the guards are just round the corner or upstairs, or a monster could be there, or they're being pursued, or the place is sinking. But I have to, if it's an imagination exercise of me seeing it. And that is the last question for today. Thank you all so very much.